This morning, the European Union Commissioner for Industrial Strategy, Stéphane Séjourné, he made a statement outlining that the European Union has offered Ukraine a more favorable alternative to the agreement with the US on rare earth metals. So over the last 10 days or so, I guess at this point, Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump have been involved in a very open diplomatic spat. Zelensky accused Donald Trump of living in a disinformation bubble or disinformation space, and Donald Trump has countered that Vladimir Zelensky is a dictator with 4% approval rating, and basically it's all Ukraine's fault that the war started, and Vladimir Zelensky better sign a rare earths mineral deal with the US, which looks like it amounts to a 19th century colonial diktat. Otherwise, Zelensky won't have a country very shortly. So definitely some hard-nosed diplomacy, not very diplomatic. And what has been going on, and why has the European Union now entered the negotiation fray by offering an alternative to the US for these minerals? Now, apparently the original idea for exchanging Ukraine's minerals for further US military support is an idea that actually comes from Zelensky, not from Donald Trump, because Donald Trump campaigned on reducing aid or maybe even completely cutting it off to Ukraine, and Vladimir Zelensky looked at it a little bit pragmatically and said, okay, we have these minerals, perhaps we can structure a deal with Donald Trump where he continues the financial and military support in exchange for future mineral rights, because obviously you would have to come in and extract them, so that wouldn't be possible realistically when the country's at war, like it is at the moment. This is the biggest war in Europe since World War II, the Russo-Ukrainian War. And importantly, he would offer minerals located in currently occupied territory in Ukraine that's occupied by Russia to give a big incentive, financial incentive for the US to supply military aid to actually win the war for Ukraine. If you remember, under the Biden administration, it seems like the strategy from the US was to not see Ukraine lose, but also not see Ukraine win this war. They slowed down the aid. They didn't give enough aid. They restricted what Ukraine could do with the weapons they got. And the Biden administration seems to have been more concerned about possible nuclear escalation or Russia collapsing if they were to lose the war. And that will obviously open a Pandora's box of many other problems, including millions of refugees from Russia, loose nukes, and possibly civil war, and non-state actors doing nefarious things with different types of weapons that they could get from Russia if it were collapsing, and also China may make a move to grab the resources in the east of Russia. So that was the aspiration from Ukraine, that maybe actually Donald Trump paradoxically might turn out to be the better option for Ukraine. However, since they've given Donald Trump this idea about rare earth metals, and in fact Ukraine may even be overselling the value of them because it obviously would cost money and you would need peace in order to extract those resources. And the big question is, well, why hasn't the Soviet Union extracted those resources previously? And also, why didn't the Ukrainian oligarchs do that in the 90s, noughties, and 2010s if it were that easy to get them out or that profitable? However, Donald Trump has decided that he wants Ukraine's mineral resources. He has said, he's actually thrown a figure of $500 billion at one point. Now he claims that the US has sent $350 billion to Ukraine and they want their money back because Biden just gave away the money. That's disputed as a figure. It's not true by any accounts at all. It's probably closer to around $100 billion if we add up the total military and financial support that the US has given to Ukraine since 2022. And they also gave that aid. So yesterday at a press conference between French President Emmanuel Macron and Donald Trump, Macron actually contradicted Trump when Trump started to say that the Europeans, they basically gave the money as loans, so they will get their money back, but the US won't. And Macron said, more or less, no, that's not true. And the figure isn't true that Donald Trump is saying that the Europeans have been giving Ukraine less. In fact, they've been giving more than the US if you add everything up. And also they gave a lot of it in the form of grants and aid, so they won't be expecting to get that money back directly. Of course, the European Union has a different incentive because in the future, Ukraine will presumably join the European Union. It is a candidate country, and then with the economic benefits of that and the common market, then the other European countries through investment and business and trade would recoup their investment over the long term, presumably. So Donald Trump has sent his Treasury Secretary last week to Kyiv, where apparently Volodymyr Zelensky was presented with a contract that he was expected to sign immediately. So we have this very hard core tactic or aggressive tactic of trying to force Ukraine. There's been a lot of threats thrown around by different actors on the US side, including Donald Trump, with his Zelensky better sign it, otherwise you won't have a country soon. And Ukraine has stood fast. The terms of the agreement basically mean handing over Ukraine's mineral wealth in exchange for nothing additional, it seems, which, why would any country sign that? It's basically the threat of not having their aid cut off or the Starlink cut off or whatever it is. However, Ukraine looks at this and says, well, if we don't sign it immediately, we can presumably negotiate better terms. And in fact, they seem, according to Donald Trump and Zelensky, to be closer to a deal on this. Trump even going as far as to say it might be signed next week, and it presumably will be not as exploitative as has been suggested. However, there is a big problem with Donald Trump's negotiating stance. That is, he is assuming that Ukraine doesn't have alternatives, that Ukraine could not fight on without US support. It certainly could fight on successfully for a certain amount of time. The US currently supplies about 30 to 40% of Ukraine's military aid, for example, or materiel. So that would be a huge gap, although they could increase domestic production and also get more materiel and aid from the European partners. And if it were that easy to extract the resources from the rare earth minerals or just the minerals that they have, then presumably they would just have that money themselves and buy weapons with it. So Ukraine is not really in that weak in negotiating position. And on top of it, Donald Trump has insisted that there will be no US troops on the ground in Ukraine, that Europe will provide the troops or someone else will provide the troops if it's not entirely European as a peacekeeping force, and the US will not allow Ukraine into NATO. The Secretary of Defense Hegseth ruled that out before they even spoke to the Russian side, and there would be no security guarantees from the US. Those security guarantees would be from the European Union and the UK, and basically Ukraine's European allies. Then the question arises, if the US is not going to provide the security guarantee, and they expect it to come from the Europeans, why would Ukraine give the mineral wealth to the US when the security guarantee is going to come from the Europeans? It would make a lot more sense for them to sign a mineral extraction deal and a new trade deal with the European allies of Ukraine, who are actually going to provide the security guarantee at the end of the day. Even according to Donald Trump, he's not entirely sure what he is offering Ukraine at all, maybe a continuation of some of the aid. However, most of the military aid is actually replenishing US stocks, and it's a bit debatable what is the actual value of that military aid. It's obviously been very important for Ukraine. Maybe the accounting value doesn't take it into account. Maybe it's even worth more in reality when it's used in Ukraine. However, Donald Trump seems to have tried to push Ukraine into making a fast and quick deal under duress, and that now seems to be backfiring if Ukraine can now negotiate with the European Union. There may also be other parties that will come in and want a piece of the pie as well. Just throwing out some ideas, Turkey, China, for example, could also make some sort of offer for some of those minerals to Ukraine, and that would make it more like a bidding war and in fact weaken the US's negotiating position. Also, the US yesterday took the unprecedented step of voting against a resolution at the United Nations that Ukraine introduced. It was passed, but they voted against it, and basically voted with Russia and Belarus against Ukraine. So definitely diplomatically unprecedented and maybe not unexpected after what we've seen over the last 2 weeks, but one has to question the negotiating strategy from Donald Trump if it were just to try to extract more resources from Ukraine. He's actually probably going to put the US in a worse position the way he's going, it would seem now at this point with the EU coming in, because if he had backed Ukraine to win, then presumably it would be pretty easy to get their hands on those resources as part of that potential deal to supply Ukraine to win. And even if it weren't explicitly there, then afterwards, as we've seen in the past, the US would be in a great position, being the security guarantor for that region, to basically extract the resources out of it, because then they would be in an even stronger negotiating position, and they would be on good diplomatic terms. People would even be pretty happy to go along with it. And by Zelensky standing up to Donald Trump in public was questionable. I did question myself whether it was the right strategy. It's definitely resulted in a rally around the leader effect in Ukraine. He is actually more popular, and the US's standing has dropped a bit, unfortunately. So I'll leave it at that for today's video. And write me a comment down below what you think about Donald Trump's negotiating strategy here with respect to rare earth minerals in Ukraine, whether it's ethical, whether it's a good strategy to get a good deal for the US, or is it actually a bad strategy that's going to lead to the US actually getting a lot less in the future. You should also consider whether countries are going to be willing to buy US military equipment or Starlink if the US is willing to use that as a method to extort money out of allies in the future, because obviously like, sensible leaders would have to take that into account, that they may be extorted if they depend on the US for security guarantees, security assurances, or they just buy their equipment if it could be, say, disabled remotely like Starlink could be. My name is Connor Klein. I'm an expert in international relations, have been living in Ukraine for many years, speak both Ukrainian and Russian. I'm here to give you a more unique, informed, and insightful perspective on the happenings in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is exactly 3 years today when I evacuated from Ukraine. I evacuated on day 2 of this extended Russian invasion. So write your comments down below in the comments section, and I will be back very soon with a new video. And of course, Slava Ukraini! Do побачення!